Back at Jeff's, and I was here a little while ago. We looked at his system. Now we're going to look at his music, and I asked Jeff to pick out more or less 10 or so of his favorite music. I mean, like I said, I'm doing this because I like Jeff, but also because so many times when I've been here, he's turned me on to some great stuff. So hopefully he's going to turn you guys on to some music that you may not be familiar with. So take it away, Jeff.
Hey Steve, thanks. First one I picked out is very timely because the Buzzcocks,
Okay.
lead singer Pete Shelley just passed away within the last month, and all the condolences and obituaries coming out of how important he was, and to make punk and marry it with love songs that were gender neutral, and how ahead of his time. And you know what's so great about this album? They made 3 great albums, but everyone seems to fall on this album, Singles Going Steady, because where they really cut their teeth was on their singles. Every single that they came out with from like 77 to 79 was just amazing, infectious stuff that has influenced so many bands, like from Nirvana to Green Day, and it almost created a genre of pop punk, but nobody did it like the Buzzcocks. And their singles on the A-sides, on side 1, and the B-sides, which are just as good as a lot of the A-sides on side 2. So I picked this out not just because he just passed away, but and I've been listening to a lot of it lately, but just because at the time when I was a teenager, it meant so much to me. Every single was just dead on, and they had one major hit that people might be familiar with, Ever Fallen in Love with Someone
Oh yeah,
You
sure.
Shouldn't Have, which was also covered a few times, but that was their only big hit in the UK. Here in the States, this was probably what most people know, and it's well worth it. It's just one after another, not a duff track.
Continuing.
One that again, it didn't come out when it was made. It was Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers. He was very heavily influenced by the Velvet Underground, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
But in '72, you see he had short hair at the time when everybody had long hair, and even his own band. He was a boy out of time, and he made this incredible music that wasn't released. And 4 years later, after he had already gone on into a different genre, it got released and on Berserkly, and it's influenced so many people because of how it's just quirky. It's quirky in the right way. He's talking about being straight when everybody around him is drugs. He talks about Pablo Picasso. I mean, a lot of things that are just
and they're funny.
They're funny.
Yeah.
And it's funny, some of these guys, David Robinson went into the Cars after this, and Jerry Harrison
Of course.
into the Talking Heads. So it not only was this album influential, the members turned into be an influential band.
Also sounds pretty good.
It sounds pretty good, yes it does. Speaking of the Velvet Underground, I go with the third album, the self-titled one. It's not as noisy as the second one, which was great. And the first one with Nico, with the banana, fantastic. But as a whole album, this one speaks the most to me, and I think it influenced so many bands, especially this third album. A lot of the acts in the UK that went into like Orange Juice and the Feelies and Galaxy 500, and the list goes on
Endless,
and on.
yeah.
Endless. You can go on and on with this album. But I think it almost started indie pop. But
Right.
except
That's true.
his subject matter was not love.
No,
It was
not quite.
it was
Heroin.
and Jesus and the murder mystery. I mean, the subject matter was not indie pop,
No.
but the sound with Mo Tucker and
definitely,
fantastic, and Sterling Morrison. So I just, this is the one that's the most listenable Velvet Underground album.
Okay,
to me.
good place to start.
Steve, we were talking about
By
this.
the way, when you hold them, angle them down slightly so the window light doesn't get there. Go like
So this one, this is like such a rock critics album, but we were talking just before
Right.
you started filming that the album, it sounds out of time. It took you, I guess, a while to get into it.
Definitely,
And I remember being turned on to this in college by Peter Holzapfel, who used to work at a record store near where I went to college. He was a member of the DBs and then later REM. And he played me Alone Again Or. And I just stood there, and he was in the singles counter at the store, and it was just, wow, I gotta know more about this band. And this is that classic album, Forever Changes by Love. They made a few albums before this, a few albums after, but this is where they really hit pay dirt.
It is. I mean, some people like myself have actually compared it to Sgt. Pepper. It's at that level of
Yeah.
amazingness.
There's a lot of orchestral pop.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those records that's over 50 years old, and yet it still blows my mind to hear it. It doesn't sound old. It sounds like it's its own thing. You know?
Yeah, he had his own vocabulary, Arthur Lee, and he passed away not too long ago as well.
Yeah.
Living in New York, I was exposed a lot to the CBGB scene and Max's. I was a little too young to catch these bands when they played there.
Right.
Just missed them by a year. But 1978, I went to see Television, played 2 shows at the Bottom Line, and then the last 2 shows about 6 months later at the bottom, a few months at the Bottom Line. And this album spoke to me. It came out of left field. That was one of the first ones I picked up that were punk, although it really has very little to do with what the definition is. But the 2 guitars of Richard Lloyd and Tom Verlaine on this created its own world that I don't think has been rivaled by anybody. I know a lot of bands have tried.
Talk about interweaving guitars, like, you know, Mick Keith and whoever was the other guitar player in the Stones over the decades.
Brian James.
I mean, just the weaving in these guys is
there's 2
better,
egos,
actually. Yeah.
but they're almost like battling within
Yeah.
in the songs, but somehow making it better
Right.
than if there was just one or the other in there. It's just one of these strokes of luck.
And it's of its time. I mean,
Yes.
if you're old enough to remember, and I am, you listen to that, you go, oh yeah, 1977. It was a good time.
Yeah, it's yes. If push came to shove and you asked me my favorite album, it might be this one, The Zombies, Odyssey, and Oracle.
Okay.
Kind of an unusual pick, although now it's becoming very popular with critics. But it was only their second album, even though they had been around like 5 years. And they had already broken up at the time the album came out. But I think the Summer of Love, the tents were already rolled up because this came out in '68.
Wow. See, I don't even know that record. We got to play that after we finish this video.
And it has their biggest, one of their biggest hits is the last song in the record, Time of the Season.
Oh, yeah,
but
of course.
That's
the
just,
Zombies. I'm sorry, I can't read. See, okay, of course I know that band.
It's just one of 12 killers. And we were also privileged. They toured the United States over the last few years. It was Rod Argent. Pre-Argent, he was the keyboard player, and Colin Blunstone. But the original members are Chris White and the original drummer. And they recreated this album from start to finish, and people were just mesmerized.
Nice. Wow.
And I just think it's...
Did they do a live record of that?
Yes.
They did?
Yes.
Okay.
But there's nothing like this. And it took my friend Mitch was always trying to, in the 80s, he's telling me, you got to listen to the second Zombies record? And then I listened to it, I go, wow, what an accomplishment. It was just so amazing.
Yeah.
Beautiful record. A band that I've always loved is the Chills. They're still around. I can't say was. They're from New Zealand. They were the proponents of the Flying Nun scene, which is a label out of the South Island, New Zealand, that was very popular in the late 80s. And I think they had their one foot in 60s psychedelia, 60s garage, and a little bit of science fiction and comic strips, but it's a very dark and penetrating music. And one song that a lot of people are familiar with is Pink Frost, which is a lot of people consider one of the top singles of all time. And this is again like the Buzzcocks. This is a collection of their singles that came out on Creation Records in the UK back in the 80s, and it collects all their singles before they made their first album.
Okay.
And they just are back around now in the Plains States later this year, actually next month.
Huh.
So the Chills have always just been amazing, just really incredibly intelligent music. I guess in the last 30 years, it's been the Chills and Teenage Fanclub for me. A lot of people know Teenage Fanclub from the Bandwagon-esque album, which I think famously beat out Nirvana's Nevermind as coming in first in Spin Magazine's top 50 of whatever year that came out. But as much as I love that record, this is the one that does it for me. I think the harmonies are just dead on. It's power pop, it's Birdsian, it's warm, it's 3 songwriters doing 4 songs each. And I just saw them play in England. I flew over because they're doing their last show with one of their main songwriters, Jerry Love, who I consider one of the best talents in the last 30 years. And they played all their Creation Records albums, start to finish. And they played this one, so I heard a lot of songs I didn't hear. Because, when you go live, you don't play every song. And it was just amazing. And it was a trip that I'll never forget, just to see him play those records. But this is the album I go to.
You know what? I'm going to change the plan slightly. Because these videos can't get too long. So we're going to stop.
And then do the reggae.
And then we're going to set a reggae one after this
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
So anyway.
How long is this one?
Right now it's 10 minutes and 22 seconds.
You don't want to go past that.
So anyway, there'll be a part 2 of this.
Yeah.